Hi, my name is Mikkel Krag, and I'm an industrial postdoc at Vitrolife, where I work in the technology division as part of the AI team. In this presentation, I'd like to share our view on the future of AI methods for automating embryo evaluation and selection. And first, I'd like to start with an overview of where we are today and where we are headed when we're talking about embryo selection. The most common practice today in IVF clinics is that embryologists manually annotate a number of morphokinetic and morphological parameters for each embryo that then help describe the development stage and the quality of that embryo. These parameters are then put into an implantation model, such as the KIT score model, that outputs a combined score for each embryo, indicating which embryo has the best potential to implant. For the past few years, we at Vitrolife have developed a number of AI-based algorithms that can help automatically predict these parameters and thereby save the embryologist a considerable amount of time while providing both consistent and accurate annotations. That's what we call indirect AI methods, because they still require an implantation model and they are based on existing traditional parameters. These models are currently running on numerous clinics and where they help optimize the daily workflow. Today, I'd also like to briefly touch upon one of our most recent works on directly predicting the chance of pregnancy using AI, and thus avoiding some of the limitations and shortcomings with the traditional approach. But I'll start by going through an example of the indirect approach, in which we've automated blastocyst grading using AI. And in case you're interested, you can find a lot more details in our recent publication in Computers in Biology and Medicine. The idea behind this is that in order to grade blastocyst, we shouldn't just look at a single image of the blastocyst, but also look at how the embryo develops into a blastocyst. So as you can see, we have a time-lapse video showing the developing embryo over time. And at a certain point in time, the embryo has been incubated for 90 hours. From there, we extract one frame from the video every hour until at a later point in time, the embryo reaches the blastocyst reaches its maximum size. That is the maximum area. We then extract a number of features for each of these images using a convolutional neural network, or CNN. The CNN automatically learns what's relevant in the images. That is, it learns itself what information to extract. And after extracting these visual features for all the images, a recurrent neural network, or an RNN, then combines these features over time such that the algorithm can also utilize the temporal dimension. For instance, it could be relevant to know if the embryo is expanding or if it's contracting, and it might also be relevant to know how many cells were used in forming the inner cell mass. Finally, we apply a classifier that predicts a grade for the inner cell mass and trophectoderm individually. And this overall method has been trained and tested using 8,664 day 5 blastocysts that have all been manually annotated by experienced embryologists. For evaluating the method, we first trained an AI on single images, extracted 110 hours post-insemination from the time-lapse video. Here we got accuracies of around 60% for both ICM and TE. We then trained an AI on videos, as I showed on the previous slide, from 90 hours post-insemination to the maximum size. And here we see an improvement to 65% and 70% accuracy, which means that there's indeed something to gain from also providing the temporal information available with time-lapse. And it does make sense, because when we look at a single image, for instance, 110 hours post-insemination, we may accidentally find a collapsed blastocyst like this one. But if we have the full sequence of images, we would see that just 10 minutes before, the blastocyst could look like this. And that's some of the temporal information that the AI can learn to utilize. Now, 70% accuracy is still far from 100%. And the reason for this is that blastocyst morphology grading is really prone to both inter and intra-observer variation. For instance, here you can see two different blastocysts that were each annotated by 46 different embryologists for both inner cell mass and trophectoderm. On the left, you see that the vast majority of them agreed that it was a perfectly looking blastocyst with A scores for both ICM and TE. However, the example on the right seems much more difficult to grade. Here we see that most of the embryologists rated the inner cell mass as B, but a lot of them also said either A or C. So in this case, they disagreed quite a lot on both inner cell mass and trophectoderm. And this illustrates quite well how how difficult the task is, but also how we will never get to 100% accuracy when evaluating the AI on annotations from single embryologists. Therefore, we collected a small dataset of 55 blastocysts that were each annotated by at least 5 different embryologists. This allowed us to calculate the average accuracy of an embryologist by comparing the answers of one embryologist against the remaining embryologists. And when we did the same thing for our AI, we saw that it was actually a bit better than the average human embryologist in predicting both inner cell mass and trophectoderm. The automated blastocyst grading method has recently been integrated into the guided annotation tool that's available with the Vitrolife EmbryoScope systems. Guided annotation now uses AI-based algorithms for estimating both morphokinetic events in terms of timing estimates and morphological parameters in terms of PN count and scores for the inner cell mass and trophectoderm. As you can see in the screenshot, all the different parameters have been estimated beforehand by the AI. In this case, some of the predictions are marked with bold. This means that the AI is more confident about these predictions than the others. For instance, we see that the AI is confident about giving both the inner cell mass and the trophectoderm the score A, whereas it's a bit more uncertain about the timing of T4 and TB in this case. If we look at morphokinetic timings, it's clear that the AI algorithm can more accurately estimate timing events during the early development stages. Here we see that the timing predictions are correct around 90% of the time for the first few timing events. And it then gradually drops down to around 30% for some of the later stages that are also more difficult to annotate. In fact, since we trained the AI on manual annotations from embryologists, including both intra and intra-observer variation, we generally see a similar trend to how they deviate in their annotations more and more during the development cycle. Which means that some of the later events, such as moral and start blastulation, generally have a higher variance than, for instance, PN fading, T2 or T3. We can, however, achieve an even better accuracy if we only look at the confident predictions from the AI. This illustrates how the bold values on the left can indicate the confidence of the AI and be used quite effectively for directing our attention to the less certain predictions during the annotation. So, going back to the overview from before, I've now covered some of our AI algorithms for indirectly predicting the chance of pregnancy by automating morphokinetic and morphological annotations. The advantage of these methods is that they are somewhat transparent, in that the embryologists can for themselves verify the AI predictions and potentially also modify them. However, indirect methods are also limited to traditional parameters and their predictiveness, and thus they basically mimic current practices in IVF labs. Therefore, we believe that the future of AI methods for embryo selection will be based on directly predicting the chance of pregnancy, based on raw time-lapse videos. And today, we're introducing IDAScore, Intelligent Data Analysis for Embryo Evaluation. IDAScore is based on a technology acquired by Vitrolife last year called IVY. And our team of AI specialists have matured the algorithm and integrated it with the current system and software. The IVY algorithm was developed on full time-lapse sequences from 8 different clinics, using a total of 8,800 embryos, of which nearly 700 had resulted in a positive fetal heartbeat. With IDAScore, we've managed to raise those numbers to 18 clinics, with a total of more than 115,000 embryos, of which more than 4,300 were positive pregnancies. Because with AI methods, and deep learning in particular, the algorithms continue to get better as we add more data. Inside the IDAScore algorithm, a 3D convolutional neural network analyzes the entire time-lapse video of the developing embryo. And based on both morphological information from each image and morphokinetic or temporal information such as timing of cell divisions and speed of development, a combined score is calculated for each embryo, describing its potential to implant and result in an actual pregnancy. When we evaluate IDAScore on our holdout test set, that is a data set with embryos never seen by the AI during training, we get an overall AUC of 0.95. This tells us that the AI has truly learned how to distinguish good quality embryos from low quality embryos, based solely on time-lapse information and information of whether they resulted in a fetal heartbeat or not. To evaluate the model's ability to generalize to new and unseen clinics, we also performed a clinical holdout test on the 12 clinics that contributed with the most data. Each clinic was evaluated on a model that was trained on the remaining 11 clinics, so that no data from the clinic had been used during training. And here you can see that all of these models resulted in AUCs above 0.90, which indicates a great generalization across the different clinics. At the moment, we are finalizing the integration of IDAScore with our current software system. This means that IDAScore will be entirely contained within the system, and thus it requires no extra manual workflow. IDAScore will provide an instant iteration for entire cohorts of embryos and deliver consistent and accurate predictions. And because the analysis is fully automatic, it does not require any manual annotations, and it's not affected by embryologist experience level or time available during periods of high workload. If we take a look at the graphical interface visible to the user or the embryologist, this is how it might look for an embryo cohort after 5 days of incubation. Here you can see that IDAScore provides a score for all the embryos, and it also highlights which of the embryos are likely to be the most viable. On the left, you can see a few examples of embryos with different scores. The upper one reaches the blastocyst stage, but it also ends up at what we would probably call a poor quality blastocyst. The middle one actually never reaches the morular stage. And as you can see, IDAScore also gives it a very low viability score. And finally, the bottom one develops into a top quality blastocyst, and it's also given the best score within the whole cohort. To sum up, IDAScore provides an instant iteration with consistent predictions for all available embryos. The algorithm was developed using more than 115,000 embryos, all using full time-lapse sequences, because we know that such sequences contain more information than just single snapshot images. IDAScore will be an integrated part of new Vitrolife time-lapse systems, and it thus provides a new fully automatic tool for embryo selection that requires no manual annotations and no extra workflow. As a final validation of the method, Vitrolife recently started a randomized control trial of IDAScore together with Vertis Health. The RCT is currently ongoing, and we are of course excited to share the outcome of that study in the future. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for watching this presentation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to go about our virtual exhibit and have a chat with our team. Thanks.